Last year, Jim McKibben got in touch with me when he was coming out to visit Fern and Jim, and he said he'd been at General Council and did anybody want to hear anything about it? And so he came and gave a fabulous report on how the General Council had gone. And it turns out that this year, he's still doing interesting things in the name of his faith and his church. So he's here with us today, and I'm going to turn it over so that he can tell us his story.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you for the opportunity to share this story with you here this morning. I just checked with Robin Pilastri, and I understand that she's a grandparent, and they're grandparents. The Pilastris are grandparents. I'm a grandparent. Maybe I'll just ask people in the congregation here this morning, raise your hand if you're a grandparent, or if you're of grandparent age. Okay, oh my goodness. Okay, any great-grandparents? Wow, terrific. Okay. Are there great-great-grandparents? Oh, fabulous. Oh my goodness, okay. That's very heartwarming for me, and I want to borrow a phrase that Robin repeated here, and that's a phrase that she used called making a difference. I sort of come at this issue in much the same way. I am a grandparent, and I'm going to speak my truth here today. I'm not going to suggest this should be what you should think or anything like that. I want to emphasize that. This is true for me. I look around at our world and I'm concerned. I'm deeply concerned. I'm deeply concerned for my children, I'm deeply concerned for my grandchildren, and I'm deeply concerned for my grandchildren's grandchildren in the future. I see a world in which the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and it's at an accelerated pace. The concentration of the world's wealth in fewer and fewer hands is a troubling situation for me. I see a world where we have accelerated environmental degradation. Floods, fires, coastal damage, unbelievable changes to our climate. People are now using the phrase climate chaos, not climate change. And I see a world where the promotion of war as a path to peace is an ongoing mantra, not only of our government, but of governments everywhere. War is a profitable situation. But I also see a world that in spite of election after election after election, nothing seems to change. Things get worse. Profit for our corporate state seems always to come before people and the planet. That's troubling for me, and I've found that troubling for me. And when I came out to British Columbia this year, I wanted to come to ask people those kinds of questions. How do you make a difference? How do you resist what's going on here in the world? If elections don't seem to solve the problem, what are you doing? What advice do you have? So I came out here and I wanted to talk to church people, and I wanted to talk to family, and I also wanted to talk to activists. And I've been in Kamloops, and I've been in Vancouver, and I've been in Nanaimo, and I'm here in Victoria, and I'm talking to as many people as possible, and I hope people tap me on the shoulder and after this is all over and tell me what they think. How do we resist? Or why is resistance so low? Why is change so hard to achieve for us? But in the course of that, I discovered there was one issue that was important to me. And there was one thing that I could do in my trip out here to British Columbia this year. My son's an articling student at a firm in the interior of British Columbia in Kamloops, and his firm represents the Tiny House Warriors. The Tiny House Warriors are Shikwanak people, who have a large area in the middle of BC. And if Matthew, if you could go back to that map just for a second, you can see their territory and I'm just going to go up here and point it out, excuse me. It sort of extends from about Kamloops, and it's all this area here. And these are all the indigenous peoples' map. And what they tell and what they say correctly is the so-called British Columbia, because it's unceded territory as far as they're concerned. It's treatyless. And so I had to remind myself of that when I came out here, about this story of reconciliation that our church talks, but also one that our church needs to walk. We need to walk the talk here. And we acknowledge our allegiance, our responsibility to Indigenous people, but what does it mean for us not only to acknowledge that, but to see that lived out? A couple of weeks before I came here, I decided that one of the things I could do was respond to a request of the Tiny House Warriors for red dresses. And you have in the bulletin a description of the Red Dress Campaign. The Red Dresses Campaign is a campaign to acknowledge the missing and murdered Indigenous women, the hundreds and hundreds of missing and murdered Indigenous women in this country who have been forgotten about, but who aren't forgotten about now because there are art installations where these red dresses are being held, and the Tiny House Warriors asked people to send them red dresses, and they wanted them to send the red dresses to those areas of where they were camped near Blue River in the interior. A little bit about the history of the Tiny House Warriors themselves. They're Shekwinak people, and they are the daughters, predominantly the Tiny House Warriors are women-led, and they are the daughters of George Manuel and the granddaughters of George Manuel, who founded the Native Indian Brotherhood in this country in the 60s, and Arthur Manuel, his son, who was a leader in the Indigenous movement in the 70s, and he often faced off with Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau many years ago in the early 70s in defending Indigenous rights. So they're his daughters who are leading this issue, this struggle now. Matthew's going to page through some of the slides here, and if we'll just stay on that one. There is a declaration of the ownership of the property which is contested. That's in Blue River. And what the Tiny House Warriors have done is they built tiny houses, and they have built them and then put beautiful paintings on the tiny houses to signify their ownership or to signify their right to this land that has been unceded. So on top of the sign of the Trans Mountain property, you have the word Shkoden, and the Shkoden is an Indigenous word which means no, we will resist. We are going to resist this because this is illegal. It's illegal property in terms of our unceded property. There are about maybe 10 or 12 tiny houses. They continue to build them. One of the things about the tiny house people is you probably haven't heard about them. They had a fairly big demonstration here in Victoria about a month ago. I'm going to, raise your hand if you saw that or heard anything about it. Okay, you're on it. Congratulations, we should give you a standing ovation here. That's great. I think that's great, and I think it's wonderful to sort of be able to make a presentation here before a church and a congregation which is so inclusive and so active and so engaged in outreach that they've hung a red dress right behind me here. It's an inspiring thing to get out there and to go and see the determination of the Shekwinak people and the Tiny House Warriors themselves. There aren't many of them. And when I went out there, my son drove me out there with my suitcase, my duffel bag full of 19 dresses that my church gathered together all of a sudden in the course of about a week. I brought it out there, and we began to hang the dresses up. The dresses are being put up at the location of where the man camp for the pipeline is going to be built. And as it's explained, and I'm really grateful that this has been explained in the bulletin here this morning, these man camps have a relationship to violence against women and violence against Indigenous women, and that relationship has been documented. So the Tiny House Warriors are very concerned about this, and they wanted to hang the red dresses up where the man camp is being planned, and that's for sure where they're putting their tiny houses. They need many, many things. They need money, they need help, they need people to support them. They need visibility. And unfortunately, even when they have a demonstration in the Capitol or in Vancouver, they don't get a lot of publicity. So it was important for me to recognize that as a person who's, on the one hand, says I believe in their right and I believe in Indigenous rights, I needed to feel that I was walking the talk. And so when I brought my big duffel bag out here with those dresses and I drove to Blue River with my son and we started to hang them up, it was an inspirational moment for me. It was a God moment for me. It was one of those moments where the hair stands up on the back of your neck and you just say, yes, yes, I'm here, I'm glad I'm here. This is where I should be. There's nothing else more important that I should be doing other than this at this time. So you can see there's a picture of one of the red dresses that we hung up, and I'm there, and it's part of the artwork there. They're saying you're passing through stolen land. And the Tiny House Warriors are going to make a stand. They've been making a stand for a long period of time. It's a stand that we need, I think, to support, to recognize, and to live out. We acknowledge their rights, and we need to live out and walk beside them. Why is this the case? Why was it so much the case for me? 3 weeks before I came here, I attended a demonstration in Toronto of Grassy Narrows. Has anyone heard of the Grassy Narrows story? Good. 50 years ago, the Dryden Pulp and Paper Mill dumped a whole bunch of methyl mercury into the Wabigoon River 50 years ago. Government after government after government has not dealt with the issue. They poisoned the land, they poisoned the water, they poisoned the fish, and they poisoned the people, and people are still dying there 50 years after the fact, and they had a demonstration. As a matter of fact, they have a demonstration every year to renew this request, and they came down to Toronto. We had a demonstration. I joined in that demonstration, and we closed off Bay and King, which is the financial center of the country. You probably didn't hear about that either, but it just doesn't get carried because it gets ignored. That was 50 years ago, 50 years of non-response. The same week that happened, our Senate, through a filibuster of some senators, ensured that our government's recognition of the rights of Indigenous people, our government's acceptance of the UN Charter on the rights of Indigenous people was turned away. So we simply don't walk the talk as a government. We say things, but we don't do it. So I'm here to just sort of talk about those kinds of things. I'm going to ask Matthew to move on a little bit here. There is Grace Manuel. I'm going to take one more minute of your time. It was 44 years ago that I was on a demonstration called the Native People's Caravan, which grabbed Native people from across the country. We had a demonstration in Ottawa. As I went to Blue River, I met Beverly Manuel, who's Arthur Manuel's wife, and I realized after talking with her that she was on that demonstration 44 years ago. It was a magic moment. As we hung up the dresses, I had to think, what's changed? What's changed in that 44 years? And on the negative side, I said nothing. But on the other positive side, I had to say, people are resisting. That kind of resilience still exists, and I was empowered by that kind of resilience. The only thing that's really changed is both Beverly and I are grandparents, and we need to do what we can. And I'm glad to be able to say that I have the physical ability and that God's given me the ability to do a little bit in that favor. So I've been inspired by that, and I've been inspired by this invitation for you all to have me share in that story. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for doing what you do for Red Dresses and Reconciliation.